I've got the furniture that was in this room.
Uh-huh.
Just had the couch recovered, actually.
All right.
The chairs. My mom has a table that was there, and then these doors opened out into the porch.
It was just so alone out here. It was just
Right.
really peaceful.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. We have wonderful memories.
It was a great spot. You could sit out here in the patio and watch the P-38s from Williams go. They were just flying around.
Imagine a time when the shopping centers and neighborhoods near the Price Freeway and Chandler Boulevard did not exist. A simpler, quieter time, long before the Stellar Air Park and the Chandler Fashion Center. In place of cars filling the mall's parking lots, picture rows of cotton and alfalfa soaking up the warm desert sun. And instead of people rushing to catch a movie at the multiplex, hundreds of workers pass through farm fields, planting, sowing, and harvesting each season's crops. And in the middle of it all, one house has stood witness for nearly 70 years and watched silently as Chandler has grown from small farm community into a vibrant, thriving city in the desert.
We look at these buildings and structures because they remain rather static once they're built. They don't get changed too much, and especially a house that hasn't been altered too much is almost like looking at a snapshot of another period of time. And it tells us about the homeowner, it tells us about their community, and it tells us about society as a whole. And those are why we look at buildings as another record, so to speak, of our past.
The city of Chandler is currently working to restore one such record of the past, known as the Price House. Chandler has ambitious plans to return the home to its former glory in its eventual use as a cultural center. A gift to the city from Suzanne Price Propstra, the house embodies the stories of the people who have lived in, worked at, and visited the home. People who include some of the city's most prominent families, as well as those with working-class roots. Once the project is completed, planners expect the Price House to stand for another 70 years and well beyond, telling visitors of a Chandler that has all but faded into the past. The tale of the Price House begins in the late 1930s. The country was emerging from the Great Depression, and Chandler, only 2 miles square, boasted a population of just over 1,300 people. The annual migration of affluent winter visitors to Chandler's luxurious San Marcos resort included Detroit businessman William McCullough and his family. During his frequent stays in Chandler, McCullough made some friends in town.
Dad told him that anytime they wanted to come out and help move cattle around, they could do that. So they would come out to the feedlot and help move them from one place to another. And after, probably 3 or 4 years, they decided they'd build a house and spend a lot longer time.
With an eye toward starting a profitable agricultural venture, William McCullough purchased a large piece of farmland more than 2 miles west of the town limits of Chandler. Danish immigrants and others had already settled the area, dotting the landscape with small homes, fields of alfalfa, sheep, and cattle. Farm workers escaping the turmoil of the Mexican Revolution had also established a tiny community in the area called Pueblo Alto, or Hightown, named after the rise upon which the settlement was situated. It was into these simple surroundings that William decided to introduce a home that reflected all the conveniences available to a well-heeled homeowner of the 1930s. This 4-bedroom home would contrast sharply with the small farm bungalows common in Chandler at that time.
You don't get the feel of a farmhouse. It was truly an estate house. Someone, even though it was situated on 350 acres or so, someone else was going to farm that land and live in a different house. Well, the architectural style is after the period revival styles that are popular in the 1920s and 30s. In this case, it's the Pueblo Revival style, which features the parapet walls with a flat roof behind, the blunted corners on the walls or rounded corners. It has little features like the canales or the vigas on the front that you see that kind of give it that kind of Spanish motif. It's a very common architectural style of the 20s and 30s, but here it's executed very, very well. And Lesher Mahoney are the architects of record on this house. They were architects in Phoenix that were very prolific during this period of time. They were very well known. They've done a number of large projects like the Orpheum Theater in downtown Phoenix, St. Mary's School. And so to commission this house would have said you had to have a certain amount of financial resources at hand to do that. Well, the house is very well constructed. First of all, we start by the materials that we see, the concrete block, there's concrete footings. It's a very substantial house. There's an extensive boiler room, we would call it, that is fully done in concrete, steps down, concrete walls, and then the block walls. There are 16-inch and 12-inch diameter pipes that are concrete pipes that run underneath the house to bring warm and cool air to different places of the house.
Prior to the start of renovation on the Price House, architectural historian David Dean and City of Chandler construction project manager Dean Schifferer toured the home to point out some of the elements that make it so unique.
Dean, here's part of my favorite parts of the house because it tells me so much about the architects. This very high-style executed door surround with this granite work is reminiscent of that neoclassical styles, elements that we're adding to the Pueblo Revival style. But most pediments in the neoclassical style would be solid and uniform across the top. Here with this design in the middle, we have what's called a broken pediment. There's a separate key or something introduced into it. And so that puts it into the Greek Revival style because of that very piece. Now what the architects have also done on this area is they've tried to incorporate elements from the Southwest with these stones here, these darker stones, which are acid etched to have these petroglyph type symbols on them. And they aren't petroglyphs that they've gone out and taken off the desert. What they've actually done is they've drawn these out and had some local supplier produce these, and then they would set them in here into the stonework. But it's a way of bringing those southwestern elements into the house. Here we are seeing the roof structure on the patio here. We see the mix of the vigas, again, another signature element of the Pueblo Revival style. These come out and they land on this large beam over here stacked on these columns. And we see these articulated capitals on top of this. And even though these are southwestern in their motif, they are reminiscent of a Greek classical column with a traditional capital that you would see on top. A lot of those features kind of all put together tells us that the McCullough family was affluent, that they envisioned this as an estate type house, that they envisioned it as a vacation home or a winter home. They could come out here when the climate was nice and it was cold back in Detroit. And it tells us that when they were here for long extended periods of time that they were going to use the house extensively.
The story of the house continues with Roy Lockhead, owner of the feedlot where William McCullough roped and rode on occasion. Roy operated the New Mexico-based Pecos Valley Milling Company, which owned mills across the Southwest. In the 1920s, Roy brought his alfalfa operation to Chandler, where alfalfa fields stretched for miles in the surrounding area and onto the nearby Gila River Indian Reservation.
He was in the alfalfa milling business. The procedure was to cut the hay and let it cure out in the sun. And then it would retain its color because it's, the green color, because it cured so quickly. We ground this hay up into almost flour-like consistency and sold it to the people that sold mixed feeds. And like Ralston Perino was one of the big customers.
William McCullough only enjoyed his carefully built country estate for a short time. Upon his death in 1942, the family decided to give up their Arizona ranch. From her home in Michigan, Mrs. McCullough contacted Roy Lockhead's wife Odessa, who herself was recently widowed.
So they just got together on the phone and my mother bought it. And I really didn't know about it. I was away at school. And I didn't really know about the transaction until I came home for Christmas vacation. And it was a real surprise to me.
As Odessa settled into her new home, the Second World War prompted the creation of Williams Airfield to train fighter pilots for the war effort. Williams brought new jobs, new residents, and visiting servicemen to Chandler. Local residents did their part to help on the home front, adding to the efforts of those who left the tiny town to serve in World War II. 30 miles south of the Lockheads' house, nearly 15,000 Japanese-American citizens lived behind barbed wire in barracks at the Gila River internment camp. Located on the Gila River Indian Reservation, the camp was one of many throughout the American West where families of Japanese descent were imprisoned for the duration of the war. While young Jim Lockhead was serving in the Army Air Corps, he received word of his mother Odessa's death in 1943. While Jim finished his time in the service and began schooling at the University of Arizona, a business agreement allowed the San Marcos Resort to rent the house out to winter visitors. In 1946, Jim met a co-ed named Anna Grijalva, a native of Superior, Arizona. They married, and at the age of 20, the newlyweds moved into a house that most young couples could only dream of.
I thought it was beautiful, and sitting out in the middle of 350 acres even made it more dramatic. I had never lived on a farm, my grandfather had, but that wasn't like my grandfather's. It was much, much finer, and it was really lovely, and we enjoyed it very, very much.
There was a staircase that went up to the roof, and there was a great view from up there. It really was. To the east it was all farmland, and to the north it was farmland. But those mountains really stood out. They were just right where you could reach out and touch them.
For everyday necessities, Jim and Anna traveled 3 miles east on the old concrete Williamsfield Road into the town of Chandler. They also employed domestic help, particularly an African-American couple, Roy and Hiawatha White.
They lived in Phoenix, but they would come out here and they'd work, like they'd cook Thanksgiving dinner and all that sort of thing. They were just wonderful people to have, and they loved Jim. They'd known him since he was about that big, and so they were like family. And then we had service quarters there, so they'd come out and they'd spend the night, and when it was ever holidays or stuff like that.
With acres of fertile soil surrounding their new house, the young Mr. Lockhead tried his hand at running the farm operation.
You think you're going to find a wonderful new crop to grow, and it's going to be the answer to all the farming problems. So one year I grew castor beans, and they were using castor bean oil in the lubrication of jet engines. Castor bean oil didn't break down like motor oil. And then a couple of years later, I decided that flax might be a good crop. And I tried that one year. I never did find the perfect answer. So I just went back to cotton and alfalfa.
The Lockhead farm also provided work for farm laborers who lived in nearby communities. Some of these workers came from the small settlement of Hightown, where even recent generations of residents have known the challenge of working in the fields.
Oh, well, it was hard work. We used to pick cotton, and we used to work in the lettuce too, thinning the lettuce, chopping the cotton and all that. We used to pick broccoli.
I worked in the fields, same as her, picking potatoes, and you had to use a belt with a couple of hooks, and then you would hook the gunny sack to it and then fill it up and stand it up and then keep on going, And I used to thin lettuce and pick lettuce, carrots, radish, anything that was out there.
Picking by hand was a slow process. Everybody picked. I mean, the whole family would go out to pick. When the picking machines came along, it made it faster, but it kind of lost some of its fun, I think. And I had one crew that was with me for a long time. Well, they were from South Phoenix. I'm not sure exactly where, but I know the contractor was. His name was Davis.
We have a truck, you know, we put the people in the truck, and people will follow that truck out to the fields. And he had a lot of people